the little series that we've been having all summer long on questions from the Bible. And the question we look at today is the question that Jesus asked as he hung on his cross. My God, why? Why have you abandoned me? It's a gutsy, powerful, personal question that most of us who've lived any length of time and experienced much of life have been asking somewhere along the way. In the case of Jesus, we know his life story basically, don't we? He says he came to speak about the truth in answer to Pilate's question. Okay, speaking the truth is a dangerous occupation. People, by and large, don't want to hear it. They'd rather you tell them lies. Tell them what they want to hear rather than the truth. For the truth sometimes has a cutting edge, very often has a cutting edge, and people wince when you speak the truth. Mind you, there are two ways to be truthful. We all know people who are terribly truthful. Everything they say is correct, and we hate them for it. Because they're the kind of people who have an amazing ability to zero in on your weak spots and stick you, as it were, with a knife and twist it when they shove it in and leave you hanging there bleeding all over the place. And that's the kind of truth that's spoken by somebody who wants to get you. And we don't need that kind of malicious kind of truth. There's enough hurt in the world already. The New Testament talks about speaking the truth in love. Being honest with someone, not because you want to get them, but because you care about them. It might not change what you say, but it surely will change the way you say it. The kind of words that you choose, the tone of voice that you use, the kind of day maybe that you choose to speak it, and those powerful but invisible vibes that we all give off with every waking moment will communicate a caringness rather than a hurtfulness. And the other person will be much more ready to listen to what you've got to say because they're convinced that you care about them. You're trying to be helpful and not hurtful. What a difference that makes. But even in that situation, if you take on the business of speaking the truth, oh, watch out, you're stepping onto pretty thin ice. A lot of people that Jesus spoke to simply didn't want to hear the truth that he had. For he challenged them. He challenged them at the very basic levels of their existence. The chief priests and the elders knew perfectly well that either he had to go or they did, and they weren't making any plans to leave. So they arranged crucifixion. And he experienced the arrest in the Garden of Gethsemane. He experienced the desertion of his best and truest friends, even one who said, I will never leave you, you can count on me. Though the others all flee, not me, said Peter. And 3 times he said, I never saw this guy in my life before, when Jesus needed him most. And he experienced the lies the leaders of Judaism told about him. He experienced the scourging that Pilate ordered rather than face up to his responsibilities and set him free because there was no just cause against him. Do you know what a Roman scourging was like? They tied you hand and feet. They bent you over backwards, and they beat you with leather thongs in which were tied pieces of stone and metal and bone, and it ripped your flesh. And many men died just under the scourging, and some went clean, stark, raving mad just under the scourging. And Jesus was scourged by the soldiers and mocked at and beaten and spit in the face and led out to be crucified. And crucifixion itself is a terrible way to die. As a general rule, you don't die fast under crucifixion. Historically, people were known to hang on crosses for up to a week and die of dehydration and malnutrition and loss of blood and a few other goodies. And once again, many went stark raving mad before they died. Thank goodness for Jesus, at least he died the same day he was crucified. Small wonder that this Jesus who saw himself sent by God uniquely and divinely with a divine mission hanging from his cross in excruciating pain could say, "My God, why? Why have you abandoned me?" There are those, of course, who would say that he didn't really mean that. That he was quoting one of the Psalms that actually begins with that very word, "My God, why have you abandoned me?" and ends up in a song of triumph that God doesn't abandon his own. Well, maybe there's a measure of truth in that, I don't know. But I don't believe that Jesus was living a charade. At least if he was, then his life has no real meaning for you, nor for me, because our lives are not charades, and sometimes we come to that gut-wrenching, dark night of the soul where we also feel abandoned by God and by those who should care. What do we say to these things? Well, I think we have to admit that Christians down through the centuries have never come up with an adequate answer to the problem of evil. We simply haven't. We believe in a God who is good, and we believe in a God who creates everything good. But we also acknowledge that evil is a powerful reality. In fact, probably more powerful than most of us give it credit for. For in our society, we tend to play fast and loose with evil. Watch out. Evil's like the camel. It puts its head inside the tent, and first thing you know, you're going back out the back end of the tent, and it's taken over. My friend, who was chaplain at Kingston Pen, and I said to him, after he'd been there a year or two, "What have you learned since going in to be chaplain at the Pen?" That's the maximum security prison where all the real tough nuts are locked up. And he said, "Well, it isn't something that I didn't know before, but it's something I've forgotten. I've come face to face again with the absolutely powerful reality of evil." He said, "There are fellows in this prison who would slit my throat from ear to ear and sit there and watch me bleed to death, not because they dislike me, not because they have anything against me. They do it just for the sheer hell of it." And he's right. There are. And what do you say about these people? Well, you could say many things, I guess. But one of the things I must say is they're people who've let too much evil into their life, and it's taken over, and they can no longer tell the difference between what's right and what's wrong, what's good and what's bad. Be careful how you react to evil. You have to become evil yourself to give evil the chance to flourish. All good people have to do is do nothing, and evil is powerful enough that it takes over on its own. But evil is evil, not by accident. Evil is evil because it is a contradiction of the good will of God. And if you are not prepared to say that the will of God for you, for me, for everyone else, and for all of creation is infinitely good, then the hellish things that happen in our world are not evil. All you can say is, what the hell they happen? But they are evil because specifically they are contradictions of the will of God, which is good for his people. And in the dark nights of the soul, when any one of us could echo the words of Jesus, "My God, why? Why? Why?" For life is often unjust, and sometimes very cruel, and sometimes doesn't make sense at all. And one reason why I believe in a meaningful life beyond this one is because I firmly believe that if this life is all that there is to life, then it is indeed a tale told by an idiot, full of sound and fury, signifying nothing. But I believe, as Jesus did, that there's life beyond this life, in which the inequalities and the injustice and the evil of this world are completely overcome in the fullness of God's love. That doesn't mean that we should abandon this world, as some people would tell us, and simply fix our gaze on a life beyond this one. No, I don't believe that for 5 seconds. It's this world that God loves. It's people like you, with all our goodness and with all our badness. People like you and me that God loves, that God struggles with, that God doesn't let go of. And if the world out there is a rotten, stinking mess, and sometimes it is, it's our call to get out there in the world and not just be nice, holy people within the four walls of the church, but to be out there on the street and in the shopping plaza or in the school or in the factory or wherever we find ourselves during the week, and be the love of God. For the antidote for evil is not more evil. The antidote for evil is caring love. Love that's prepared to give and seek nothing in return. Love that will not be defeated. Love that takes part of the very essence of God Himself. And as I say that suffering and pain and injustice are evil, I also can see a redemptiveness through it. You've heard me say many times, and you will hear me say it many times again, I don't believe God wills everything that happens. That would be a hellish concept of God. But I believe God wills something out of everything that happens. I don't actually personally believe that God willed Jesus to be crucified. I think that's evil humanity rising up and trying to wipe off the goodness of God, even incarnate in human form. But God's powerful yes to Jesus for now and forever is the resurrection that sets Jesus free from time and space to be your contemporary and mine, your brother, your friend, and mine. I believe it's love that is the answer to hate. It's love that is the answer to evil. I'm not saying that I'm the best example of putting that into practice, because sometimes I'm tempted also to respond to evil with evil and to respond to hate with more hate. But I'm slowly, hopefully, beginning to learn that more hate never answers hate and more evil never really solves evil. It is only love that can cancel out those things. I remember going into a hospital room one time, looking for a member of my congregation who'd been moved, but lying there in the bed was a young lad, about 20 years old. And I didn't know him, and he didn't know me, but I blundered in upon him, so we started talking. And he'd been fishing with his dad up in Buckhorn Lake. Not terribly far from your cottage, actually, Marg. At twilight. And someone had come along on a speedboat round a corner of an island and smucked into their boat and demolished their boat and sent he and his dad spilling into the water, breaking some of his ribs. 2 of his ribs actually punctured one of his lungs. And he was telling me how excruciatingly painful that was. To even take a breath, he said, was just like someone stabbing you with a knife. And I was commiserating with him and saying, gee, that's too bad, that's really awful, and so on. And he rather abruptly stopped me. And he said, it's not all bad, you know. It's not all bad. And I said, what could possibly be good about it? And he said, you know, I've been disgustingly healthy all my life so far. I've never really known what it meant to feel pain. And I've always been very impatient with anybody who complained about pain. I can tell you, I'm going to be a hell of a lot more sympathetic in future. God does not will everything that happens, but God can take even the worst that happens and out of it bring something beautiful if we'll let Him. That's the story of the crucifixion and the resurrection. That's the experience of Christians down through the centuries. Dark though the night may be, Though you cannot find God at this particular point in time. My father-in-law, when he went through a very serious cancer operation, but at that point in time, he said to me, Bill, I can't pray anymore. God seems so far away from me. What can I do? And I said, Bert, keep praying. Keep praying. Even if you can't find God, believe that God will find you. And indeed, he did. And he will find you too, just as he found Jesus and gave him his powerful yes to everything that Jesus stood for then, for now, and for eternity.